Week 5 of the college football season is upon us, and this might be one of the most exciting weeks of the entire college football season, given that we have one of the premier matchups in the new SEC between Georgia and Alabama. But we're going to be going through giving my picks for each and every game of the college football season. Did it last week. I thought it did well enough to where I wanted to try it again. What didn't do very well was our picks. We were terrible last week. That's part of what makes college football really fun is you never know what's going to happen on any given week. So today we're going to be going through each and every FBS game, given the odds and ultimately who I think is going to win. But before we get into it, consider hitting that like and subscribe button. Leave a comment. Let me know what are your favorite bets of the week. Would love to hear your thoughts down in the description below. Also, be sure to check out my Patreon, which is linked down in the description. There, you guys will get exclusive access to my in-depth draft guide, analysis, and so much more, as well as signing up for Underdog Fantasy using my code JWAC to get double your initial deposit. Let's go ahead and get into it with the first game between Army and Temple. A pretty fun one here. Army 3-0 on the season, playing really good. They're 12.5-point favorites going into Philadelphia. I'm going to take Army. Not a game that I'm going to have very many eyes on, but Army's playing really good football on both sides, and I think they pull off the win against Temple. Virginia Tech and Miami. Coming into the year, this was my ACC championship prediction. I thought Virginia Tech was going to be really good. Miami, I had going undefeated and winning the ACC. So I've been pretty high on Miami since the offseason, and they haven't exactly been what I thought. Miami is 20-point favorites at home. I think that line's a bit high because I do think Virginia Tech is scrappy, especially defensively, but I do ultimately think Miami wins. I might take Virginia Tech plus 20, though, because I just don't think that Miami's going to win by 3 scores. Washington and Rutgers, maybe my favorite bet of the week. It's Rutgers minus 2.5. Rutgers is playing some of the best football in the country. They've got one of the best running backs in Kyle Monangai. The defense is playing good, and their offensive line is absolutely fantastic. They've got really good pieces on this team. Washington's a team that I just don't really feel like is going to be in this game for very long. 2.5 points at home in Jersey. It's a far way to travel for Washington. I'm going to go with Rutgers in this game. Then we got Western Kentucky and Boston College. Boston College being 13-point favorites. I am going to go with the Golden Eagles here. They've quietly been one of the more competitive teams in the ACC with their only loss on the season. Who was their only loss in the year? I am blanking on maybe Syracuse. Might have been Syracuse. I'm probably wrong on that, but this is a pretty good Boston College team, a great running attack, and the Western Kentucky team coming off a pretty good win against Toledo. I don't really think it's going to matter too much. It's at home for Boston College. Give me the Eagles. Then we got BYU and Baylor. BYU is they're 3.5-point underdogs in this game. I don't know how that's possible. BYU is ranked 22nd in the country. Give me BYU plus 3.5 in this one. I think this should be a pretty good win for BYU to go to 5-0. Baylor coming off a crushing loss to Colorado. And this BYU team is really good. They're flying. They're making plays defensively. Kansas State looked horrible. I'm going to go with BYU in this one. Maryland and Indiana is kind of one of my sleeper game of the weeks. I'm going with the Hoosiers, though. I've kind of been on this Hoosiers train since the offseason. I thought they were going to be one of these sleepers coming into the year, and so far that has reigned true. Indiana has a top 5 scoring, or I believe a top 10 scoring offense and a top 10 scoring defense. They made my top 25 this week. It's a Maryland team that's really good. Ty Felton is playing incredible football. They've got really good pieces offensively. Defensively, I think that Curtis Rourke and this Indiana offense is just a step ahead of them right now. I am going to go with Indiana. Oklahoma State and Kansas State, 2 Big 12 teams coming off bad losses. Oklahoma State to Utah, Kansas State to BYU. I'm going to go with Oklahoma State. I thought they had the better loss, if you will, in terms of I just didn't really feel like Kansas State had a chance. Oklahoma State made things interesting late in that game. The big concern you have with Oklahoma State is their run game. Ollie Gordon has looked like a shell of himself from last year, but I think their defense is pretty solid at Oklahoma State. So I'm going to take them to pull off the win on the road in Manhattan, and I'm going to have Oklahoma State beat Kansas State. Northern Illinois and NC State, one of the weirdest games of the week. NC State is 6.5-point favorites. I'm going with Northern Illinois to pull off their second power conference win. NC State has just looked terrible all season long to me. They looked rough against Western Carolina, got absolutely blown out by both Clemson and Tennessee. They just don't feel like they have it. And this is a Northern Illinois team that has a pretty good track record right now. They did just lose to Buffalo last week in a pretty tough loss for them, but you've beaten Notre Dame. They're 2-1. They've got a good run game. I'm going to take Northern Illinois to pull off the upset. NC State is 6.5-point favorites in this game. I'm going to go with Northern Illinois plus 6.5 to pull off the upset. Then we got Nebraska and Purdue. Nebraska is 10-point favorites going in to Purdue, and I do think Nebraska wins this game. Coming off a tough loss in overtime to Illinois at home, I feel like they were in that game. They shot themselves in the foot with penalties, but Nebraska is a good football team. They still ranked at number 25 in the country for me, which maybe I'm at fault for having them over BYU, but I do really like this Nebraska team. It's a Purdue team that quite honestly hasn't shown very much life at all. So I'm going to go with the Cornhuskers to beat the Boilermakers. Holy Cross and Syracuse, this one feels like it's a pretty easy Syracuse win. Coming off a tough loss to Stanford. Some weird losses this week, but I do think Syracuse gets their get back in this game against a Holy Cross team that is just an inferior opponent. They're 1-3 FCS opponent. This should be an easy win for the Orange. South Florida and Tulane. Tulane is 5-point favorites in this one. This one's interesting. Tulane is 2-0 in they lost to Kansas State. They lost to Oklahoma. So those two losses could come back to hurt them. South Florida's been scrappy, though. Byron Brown, their run game is really fun. They play tough defense. They played Miami well in the first half. They played Alabama well for 3 quarters. When it comes down to it, I think I just trust Tulane a little bit more. I think they're slightly better coached. And I'm going to go with the Green Wave, but I think this is going to be a really fun, close game. Navy, UAB. Navy's 3-0 coming off a really big win against Memphis, and their defense played really well. The offense was putting points on the board. Give me 2 military schools to get the wins this week with both Army and Navy pulling it off. Then we've got a fun one between Buffalo and UConn. UConn, interesting team. They're not necessarily, wouldn't say they're good. Buffalo coming off a big win right now as well. UConn is 6.5-point favorites. I do think I'm going to go with the Bulls, though. I'm going to take Buffalo to upset UConn. Not really much thinking into that one. Buffalo is coming off a big upset, however, against Northern Illinois. I think they're going to be feeling good. I'm going to take the Buffalo Bulls. Then we get to some conference matchups that are pretty exciting, and we kick things off with Michigan and Minnesota. 2 pretty interesting teams. Michigan's defense looked incredible on Saturday against USC. Minnesota has a tough defense. They've got a few playmakers offensively, but I'm not going to bet against the Wolverines. Their defense is just too good. I think they're going to be able to stop the rushing attack of Minnesota. And I'm going to go, whether their quarterback plays good or not, I think Michigan's the better team here. So I'm going to go with Michigan. Kentucky and Ole Miss, I'm going with Ole Miss. They're 17.5-point favorites at home. I mean, Jackson Dart is playing incredible football. The defense looks very good. And this is a really promising Ole Miss team that has, in my opinion, legitimate chances to be the national champion. So Ole Miss, number 6 in the country, they are going to pull off the win against Kentucky. Then we get Ball State and James Madison, a really fun James Madison team that I am going to take to win. They might be the best group of 5 team left. I had UNLV in there. With the controversy they've had this week, I don't know if I could still, with a clear conscience, pick them. James Madison drops 70 on UNC last week, going up against a Ball State team that really isn't good. They're 21-point favorites. I'm going to go with James Madison. Texas State and Sam Houston State, I like the Bobcats. I think this is a fun Texas State team. And they've played pretty good this season. Sam Houston, both these teams above 500. Texas State is 8-point favorites, though. They're one of the better teams in Texas. Honestly, they're a really good football team. I'm going to go with the Bobcats there. Then we've got Liberty and App State. With the way App State's playing, I feel like this could be a blowout. I'm trying to pull up the line here. Yeah, it's Liberty minus 3.5. I'm smashing that line with the way App State has come out and looked. They got absolutely embarrassed by Clemson, and then they just get blown out by South Alabama. Two really, really ugly games if you are an App State fan. And Liberty is the best team in the American. So I think that's a pretty easy, convincing win for the Flames. Oklahoma and Auburn, I think this is a win for Oklahoma. They're starting a new quarterback here. He looked okay against Tennessee the other night. I don't think anyone has looked good against that Tennessee team right now. This is a good Oklahoma defense, and I think against an Auburn team that really hasn't shown the ability to pass the football, I think Oklahoma should be able to pull off this win. So I'm going to take them to go into Auburn, get their first SEC win, and hopefully get some momentum moving into the rest of this year. San Diego State and Central Michigan, very interesting one here. Central Michigan at home, the favorites minus 3. They are above 500. Don't really have any horses in the race here. I think I'm going to go with San Diego State, though. Like some of the pieces, they've got a little bit more, and I think they pull off the upset here. Georgia Southern, Georgia State. Again, not really a game I'm too invested in. Not too familiar with either of these teams, but I'm going to go with Georgia State, the home team. They always seem to have some good talent stored away there, so give me the Panthers. Then we've got Eastern Michigan and Kent State. Talk about one of the worst games you'll find all day. Kent State's one of the worst teams in the FBS. Give me Eastern Michigan. TCU, Kansas. There we go. A little bit more of a fun matchup here. Kansas, 1.5-point favorites at home. I really don't like this Kansas team, unfortunately. I think Jalen Daniels is actively throwing them out of games right now. They've got Devin Neal, who's looked good, but it's just a Kansas team that I don't trust. I'm going to go with the Horned Frogs of TCU to pull off the upset in Kansas. Then we got Western Michigan and Marshall. I like this Marshall team. I'm going to take them to ultimately get the win. They've got a tough defense. They play good. They run the ball well. I think this is a good Thundering Herd team. They played well against Ohio State for most of this game, in all honesty. They moved the ball. They looked pretty good. You feel pretty good about Marshall, I think. Western Michigan, they're fine. I'm not too invested in them, but I do like this Marshall team, so I'm going to go with them. UMass, Miami, Ohio. I mean, UMass barely beat an FBS or an FCS school last week. Give me Miami, Ohio. They're another team. Started off pretty good for them, in all honesty. They're 17.5-point favorites. I know they don't have a win. This is going to be the first win. Then we get Louisville and Notre Dame. One of the games of the week. I'm going to go with the Cardinals here. I think Louisville's slightly better. This is Louisville's first real test, I think. We saw them beat Georgia Tech last week. Looked good. They are 6.5-point underdogs in this one. But it's a Notre Dame team that I think when it comes down to it, they do struggle to pass the ball. They're going to want to run the football this game. Louisville has a defense to stop the run. If you're making Notre Dame pass, it's going to be a long day for Riley Leonard in that offense. And I think Louisville is going to do a good job of limiting what this team wants to do. So I'm going to go with the Cardinals to pull off the upset. Haven't really been impressed with Notre Dame. They pulled off the big win against Purdue. Purdue sucks. They beat Miami of Ohio, who hadn't won a game, one of the worst rushing offenses in all of FBS. This is, I think, going to be a game where if Notre Dame loses, it completely eliminates them from college football playoff contention. Then we got Ohio and Akron, the LeBron James matchup. Ohio's pretty solid. They've got some pieces that I like. I'm going to go with the University of Ohio to pull it off. Arkansas and Texas A&M. Texas A&M's playing pretty solid right now. They had the rough one week 1 against Notre Dame. Haven't lost since then. And they're 4-point favorites against an Arkansas team that is also 3-1. But I honestly think I do favor the Aggies in this one. I think I like some of the pieces they have. They've been moving the ball a little bit more effectively. Give me the Aggies over the Razorbacks. Then what is, in my opinion, the second best game of the weekend is Colorado and UCF. Now, UCF is 14.5-point favorites in this one. I think that line is ridiculously high. UCF is in my top 25. Colorado has looked pretty solid for back-to-back weeks. The defense is playing better than they ever have in the Deion Sanders era, and they're adding the run. I know everybody wants to hate this Colorado team, but this is a good football team right now that's playing solid. Now, they shouldn't have gone down to Baylor. They still won that game, though, and they played good down the stretch. It's a UCF team that I think they're going to want to run the ball, which has been one of Colorado's big issues all year, has been defending the run. This game could go either way, and I'm not ruling out the possibility of Colorado pulling off the upset. I really think it's in the cards here. I'm higher on Colorado than most people. It comes down to the quarterbacks for me. Shadur Sanders, KJ Jefferson. I'm going to go with UCF. I'm going to play it safe here, even though I want to pick Colorado in this one. I think they have a real legitimate chance to pull off the upset here against a good UCF team, but I'm not going to do it. I'm going to stick with my gut here, and I'm going to go with UCF. But I am going to probably take Colorado plus 14.5. That line's ridiculous. Fresno State, UNLV. It's going to be a Fresno State win. This is a pretty good Fresno State team. They're 3-1. I think they give UNLV their first loss of the season. I know Matthew Sluka hasn't had the greatest season, but this situation is looming large for UNLV. A lot of controversy around this program right now, and it's not a program I feel confident about going into the week. I think they're on upset alert. They are 1.5-point favorites. This is a big one for the Mountain West, and I think Fresno State wins this. This would be a big win for them, so I'm going to take them to pull off the upset in this one. Then we've got Wisconsin and USC. USC looked really comfortable against Michigan in the second half. I am taking them to win this game. Wisconsin, first game without Tyler Van Dyke, 15.5-point favorites, I like the Trojans in this one to pull off the win. Wake Forest and Louisiana. Wake Forest is 1-2. Louisiana's 2-1. I'm going to favor the ACC school here. Go with Wake Forest. They haven't had the greatest season in the world thus far, but I do ultimately like this Wake Forest team. Then we've got North Carolina and Duke, and this is a must-win for North Carolina, I think. They're 3-1, but with the way things looked last week, yikes. I mean, you lost by 70, or you allowed 70 to James Madison. In-state rivalry here. I am going to go with North Carolina to get their right the ship a little bit. I do think they pull off this win. I like this Tar Heels team. And I think they got a run game that's going to be tough for Duke to stop. And I think they hand Duke their first loss of the year. UTSA, East Carolina, a good matchup in the American. I'm going to go with UTSA in this one. I think the Roadrunners haven't really hit their stride yet, but this is a good football team that's got some pieces. East Carolina's without their best player. Give me the Roadrunners. Mississippi State, Texas. Hook 'em. I'm not even going to explain it. They're 39-point favorites, and that line feels very fair. Mississippi State's the worst team in the SEC. This should be an easy win for Texas. Bowling Green, Old Dominion. Old Dominion still yet to win a game. Bowling Green has played really tough against both Penn State and Texas A&M. They've lost by one possession in both those games. That is where both of their losses have come from early on. I like this Bowling Green team. Harold Fannon's playing better football than a lot of players in the country right now. Really, really like what we've seen from Bowling Green thus far. I'm going to take them to beat Old Dominion. Florida Atlantic taking on Wagner. FBS, FCS matchup. FAU's not great, but I'm usually going to favor the FBS schools over an FCS team. Then we've got Florida International, Louisiana Tech. Give me Louisiana Tech. FIU, I believe they lost to Monmouth last week. So, I mean, they can't beat an FCS school. Not ideal. Louisiana Tech is a scrappy football team that's 2.5-point favorites. I like that line. I think I would take that. Give me Louisiana Tech. Then we got Kennesaw State, UT Martin, a practical FCS matchup. Kennesaw State, their first year in the FBS. I'm going to take Kennesaw State. Really haven't done much studying into either of these programs. So we're just going to go with Kennesaw State in this one. Stanford and Clemson. Clemson's 21.5-point favorites. I think that line's a bit high. I think Stanford's playing pretty good. They're 2-1, but I am ultimately going to go with the Tigers. Clemson's playing better than I thought they would be playing after a brutal week 1 loss. I like what Clemson has shown, so I'm going to take them to get the win. And then in the same light, Ohio State, I think, is going to beat Michigan State. They're 24-point favorites. Really like what Ohio State has been doing, particularly on the ground. So give me the Buckeyes. Charlotte and Rice. Rice coming off their first win of the year. I think they build momentum. 7-point favorites against a Charlotte team that is not great. So we're going to go with Rice. Louisiana Monroe and Troy. I do like Troy coming off their first win of the season as well. 7.5-point favorites. I think they're a good football team there at the Trojans. Iowa State and Houston. Iowa State is the most underrated team in college football right now. They are playing fantastic football. They're 14-point favorites. I think that line's favorable. Donovan Smith, I just never get the hype around. He's coming off one of his worst performances of his collegiate career. This Houston team is just not very good. And Iowa State, they're ranked 18th in the country. I think this is a really good football team. I'm taking them to get the win here on the road against Houston. Tulsa and North Texas. It's a good North Texas team. I am going to take them to beat Tulsa here. I think that's going to be a fun win. And this is a North Texas team that's 3-1 on the year. I like the way that they have been playing. Then we're getting into some of the big matchups. Illinois, Penn State, number 9 versus number 19. Really, really like this Illinois team. And I don't think they're going to beat Penn State. I am going to take it. This is not going to be a 19-point victory for Illinois or for Penn State. I think it's going to be a close game. Wouldn't be shocked in the slightest if Illinois pulls off the upset here. With the way their receivers are playing, the way their defense is playing, I really like what the Fighting Illini are doing. Then we got Georgia and Alabama. Game of the year here thus far, and what a matchup this is. Georgia, 2-point favorites on the road against Alabama. Georgia and Alabama both had a week to prepare for this game. Last time we saw both these teams, Alabama looked fantastic against Wisconsin. Georgia was on high upset alert. I am going to go with the Dogs, though. I think Georgia slightly better all around. They got some defensive pieces that should be coming back, and I think Georgia gets to win, but this game is going to be awesome down the stretch, and I do think Georgia beats Kalen DeBoer's Alabama team. Then we got Middle Tennessee State and Memphis. I think Memphis has a big statement win after a really rough loss to Navy last week, a game that they had every chance to win, and they just were never able to finish it out. South Alabama, LSU. South Alabama has looked incredible for 2 straight weeks in terms of scoring. And with the way their offense is playing, I wouldn't be shocked if they give LSU a tough time. LSU's 22-point favorites. This is a stay-away game for me. I just don't like the line. But South Alabama, I think, could give this team a really difficult time with the way that their offense has been moving the football. So I am going to go with LSU, but I think it's going to be a closer game than people are expecting. New Mexico State, both of these teams are terrible. I'm going to go with New Mexico. I think they get their first win of the year on the road. I like some of the stuff we saw from their quarterback early in the year. So we're just going to go with that, and we'll stick with that. Florida State coming off their first win, and it's going to go back to the losing column for Florida State. I like SMU here. Looked really solid against TCU, a TCU team that I didn't feel great about. I thought they would win, but I wasn't like enamored with them. SMU really dominated them. So definitely something I like to see. I think SMU wins another one. Texas Tech, Cincinnati coming off a weird win against Houston. I like this Red Raiders team. They're playing good. Baron Morton's playing good football. They're able to run the ball with Taj Brooks. Give me the Red Raiders in this one. Air Force and Wyoming. Give me Air Force. Wyoming, you can make a strong case of the worst team in the FBS right now. Air Force, they're 1-4. They're not having that much better of a season, but I'm ultimately going to take the Falcons. Then we got Washington State and Boise State, one of my favorite games of the weekend. Again, Washington State 4-0. The only loss for Boise State this season has been against Oregon. I'm going to take Boise State at home on the blue turf. And if Washington State wins this game, I think that's a really big win for them. They have a chance to get in as one of these at-large bids if they are undefeated. This would be a huge win for their resume. I like Boise State in this one. Arizona, Utah. I loved Arizona coming into the year, but I just haven't really liked what I've seen from them up to this point. I'm going to go with Utah with or without Cam Rising. Their defense is playing good. They're 11-point favorites in this one. And then to wrap it out, Oregon, UCLA. I think Oregon had that first big statement win of their season. Big Ten opener for them. I think there's going to be a big one for the Ducks to kind of get on track and hopefully get to the college football playoff. But those are my picks of the week. Some of my favorite bets that we talked about: Colorado plus 14.5. That line doesn't make any sense. Neither does Illinois plus 19. I don't think either of those teams win, but I do like those odds. Going through some of these other ones, Iowa State minus 14 feels very respectable to me. I like Ohio State minus 24 as well. There's some good ones in there. Texas minus 39. Really good matchups this weekend. I do like Fresno State money line over UNLV. But let me know, what are your favorite bets of the week? Who are you betting to win? Love to hear your thoughts down in the comment section below. Leave a like, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Adios.